And we are live. Thank you for joining us today on this discussion about SE. I particularly love my current it's not a job, it's more of a hobby, where I get to meet my heroes, and that's a really big deal to me. Here's one of my heroes. This is Ben Diesel. If you are subscribed to the his channel, Seeds of Thought SE, there's a link in the description. You may This might be the first time you've had a chance to see his face, because oftentimes he has a camera pointed at his interlocutor and we don't get to see him. Welcome, Ben. Please tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Dolly. It's a pleasure to be here. Um, I'm pretty much the same as Eddie you had on Friday. Just some guy who stumbled onto Street Epistemology by chance. Thought, wow, this is really, really cool. Started with the guinea pigs. All my colleagues at work annoyed the hell out of them, and decided to take it to the streets. Yeah, I actually started out by first just going out without a camera, just to see how it would work. I was wondering if, especially here in South Africa, if I would have the same type of reaction that Anthony gets when he goes out and speaks to people. And I was pleasantly surprised. So I wrote a blog post, submitted it to the SE uh, forum, and here I am.
Fantastic. So, how long has Seeds of Thought? When did that start? When did you start pushing videos out there?
And it was 2 years ago.
Okay, good. Um, let's see. First question. What I have these questions in something of a random order. What
Okay.
actions could the examiner take that would disqualify a conversation from being street epistemology? And this is your personal standard of SE, not what you think the consensus might be.
My personal standard. For me, it really comes down to my emotional response. So if I get into a state where I become argumentative or I become angry, usually that's my point where I say, okay, this isn't AC anymore, and I would typically go and say, okay, let me try a different approach, or let's stop the conversation and cool down before we continue.
Yeah, thank you. Next question. What is it? There it goes. Are you aware of some of the criticisms of SE? Some see it as maybe dishonest or even manipulative. And if so, do you think there's any merit to those criticisms?
I joined the local chapter of Ratio Christi. I don't know if some of the listeners might be aware of it. It's an
Mm-hmm.
international Christian apologetics organization, and
Okay.
I actually offered to host one of their nights specifically on criticism, street epistemology, and criticisms of street epistemology. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to go and research all these apologetic videos and the criticism that come up. Um, So yes, I am aware of the criticisms. I think some of them are definitely valid. It depends on who's doing the street epistemology and the approach that they take, obviously. Um, at the end of the evening, where we had this discussion, the major criticism that kind of was still raised was that street epistemology doesn't offer a replacement for the beliefs that it challenges, which to me was a very interesting
Oh,
criticism. Yeah.
wow.
So the guy was like, or the person who brought this up said that street epistemology is philosophically, what was the word he used? Something like just devoid of meaning. And to me,
Oh, wow.
that's more like,
Moot or
yeah,
bankrupt or
or
something. Okay.
yes, bankrupt. There we go.
Okay.
It's more
Philosophically bankrupt.
a feature rather than a.
Wow. Yeah. My goodness. When I go into an Elenchus, I am allowed one bias, and that is in favor of critical thinking.
Mm,
And so I think it does offer a replacement for the belief, a belief in what you arrive at by your critical thinking.
yeah.
If you can get your critical thinking in order, your beliefs will get chopped down a little bit differently. Your epistemology changes, your final list that gets through the filters change, and you're left with that. And that seems straightforward. Okay. Next question. You wrote a survey a while back. How long ago did you write that survey? I've seen versions of it as early as 2018.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Should be. I think it was about 6 months after I started the channel. I did the survey.
Ah, okay. I have another practitioner who's a big fan of yours, and I'm also a big fan of abstract activist. If you bring up your screen, I'm probably going to go to voice only so that you guys can have a 2-screen. And he said, if you ever get Ben Diesel on, I want to ask him questions about that survey. So, Nathan, if you're available to post your bring up your video, I there you go. We're in a two-way.
Is that Ben Diesel?
It's Nathan. This is seriously a treat, man. I've been following your channel, and it's quickly turning into one of my favorite channels for Street Epistemology.
Awesome, thank you. I've been working hard to get some new interviews in the queue. So yeah, it's been good. And I remember coming across the survey, kind of perusing through the Street Epistemology website before I was getting ready to go down to Burning Man and do an SE workshop there. So I don't know if you know much about Burning Man, but it's a place where people can go and create whatever kind of workshop they want. And I wanted my workshop to be about how people can ask each other questions. And I had the workshop was in the manual, the book, and I used this survey as an outline to help people who have never heard about street epistemology before get into it and get involved with it. And it was most amazing to see when I gave out 2 surveys to 2 participants who are like couples usually, and then have them ask questions of each other as to why they're in different places on the survey. And then if they agreed about something I disagreed with, then I'd ask them questions there at the very end. And not one, and the last question every single time was this worth doing? And I never got a no response,
really?
ever.
That's
Everyone
amazing.
said it was worth doing. So it seems to be a great outline, I think. I can definitely see why there could be some issues with just bringing this survey into any discussion. We definitely, I think the strongest argument against using the survey would be we don't want to be seen as though we're bringing something to the table when somebody has a belief and we're bringing an outline that kind of says, I've already thought about all of the things that you've thought about. So I can see that being a concern. However, a lot of the beliefs out there rest on these reasons. These are common reasons that come up again and again and again to believe or support beliefs in all sorts of stuff. And so this is a great way of non-combatively investigating why we would be concerned about our reasons for anything before getting into something specific. So when I read this survey on the website for the first time, I was awestruck because it was finally a way for me to stay organized with what I've heard Anthony Magnabosco and Reed and Ty and everybody do all the time on their channels, in a way that could help me show kind of what my epistemology is without telling them what my epistemology is, in about an hour if I want to take my time with it, or I could go quicker. I think the quickest I've ever gone through it is like 10 minutes. But I generally prefer to take a slower approach. And anyway, when I saw this, I was like, man, I feel like I felt like I could have written it. Like it was like I felt like you dug into my brain and pulled it out. So I printed off 300 of them and I only have 3 left. So I've done a lot of these,
That's
and
insane.
there's an interesting pattern that emerges when you do that many surveys.
So how do you think of the getting the couples to ask each other questions? I think that's it. Because what I found,
Man, it's
the very first
what'd you
time I
find?
went out of the survey, so I had a couple of interviews where it was just me and one other person, and those were okay, but especially the way I approached it was just to read off the question and not really give my input. I was merely there as a mirror for whatever the person said back to me. But the video I ended up posting where I had 2 guys, 2 friends who I was interviewing together, and to see the interaction between them and how the way they reacted when they heard the other guy give an answer that they were like, "That's weird. I never thought of that. Why are you saying that?" That was really when I realized the potential that just asking these questions has.
Yeah, I have an unreleased video that I think I'll probably release closer to the anniversary of Burning Man, since Burning Man is closed this year. See if I can get some fans of Burning Man to check out the content. But I have an unreleased interview of 2 senior like a senior couple, and boy are they funny. Uh, and their banter back and forth is pretty good. I didn't have a mic back then. I was just rolling with my old school iPhone 6, I think it was. And so the audio quality isn't the best, but it's probably worth posting. So you might be seeing that in the future. We'll see. And I use a survey on both of them for that. Yeah.
I have a question from the audience. Reed
y-
Nice Wonder
yes,
asks,
please.
what percentage of those were recorded? Some psychology grad student, I'm sure, would love that data.
I'd say so. I've been to Burning Man a lot, 7 times, maybe 8. I can't remember. I'm losing track. This last year that I went, I did it anywhere between 6 to 8 hours a day for 7 days in a row. It was just too rewarding to not do it. I couldn't stop thinking about it every day, especially because I wasn't actually challenging a belief. I was just challenging their epistemology directly. And one in particular, the audio is really horrible on all of them. So I think instead I'm going to probably use the footage for a compilation video about like how I tried and failed to do SE, and how I found myself not listening to people sometimes when I listen back to my recording, and how I failed so much. And thought I was doing so great until I listened back to my recording, and after the burn was over. So what percentages? I don't know. I'd say like 80% were actually recorded throughout the 300 of these that I did, but many of them are not. They're like long. My interviews are long. They're not 5-minute interviews. So whenever I have to dig back through my interview to see if it's good enough to post, it's like an hour to 2 hour commitment to review it to see if it's even something I want to throw out there. But they're really fascinating. I think the most fascinating interview at Burning Man was somebody who was 0% on every belief he had, and I couldn't break through with why that would be. He said that he's not confident in anything and questions everything. It was a very weird discussion, but yeah, it's weird what can come up with this basic epistemology survey.
I wonder how useful it would be to like a psychology student. I don't think it's the questions are formulated quite well enough so that you can make any conclusions from them necessarily. Like, especially when you start with stuff about reality, it's just so difficult to word those in a way where it's super clear what you're trying to mean. But to me, that's kind of one of the good things about the survey is if somebody asks you, okay, but what does this mean? And you can ask them back, okay, what does this mean to you? That's where a lot of the interesting things start happening, rather than just getting them to tick off where they stand on each of the claims or each of the statements.
I think the most shocking thing I found, percentage-wise, was how many people disagreed to number one on the survey, which is truth is that which best matches external reality.
Mm.
Which, by the way, what do you think about? Because I've decided to like I don't know what happened to the original survey like link, so I rebuilt it, and then as soon as I rebuilt it, the original one was rebuilt also. So there's like more than one version going out right now. Um, what do you think about the word external in number one? Do you think that trips people up, or is that helpful in illustrating what we mean by excluding internal things? I think that's what maybe your intent was by including external. But have you found that people get tripped up by that word, external reality, rather than just reality?
I don't think I've asked or gone through the survey with enough people to actually be able to say, yes, I think this is something that trips them up. I've got a friend who's also done a couple of hundred of them, so I'll ask him that question. But the reason is for that word being there, and it's also, it kind of makes it sound clunky, but a lot of people go to that, but reality is what you perceive. Every one of us has our own reality. And the idea there was just to kind of make a distinction to say, listen, what do we call this thing that seems to be outside of us? So I went with external, but I like that. I really like that there's more than one version of the survey out at the moment. And that's exactly why I put it out, was with the hope that somebody might pick it up and run with it. Even if there's more questions coming into it, that'll be great.
Yeah. Well, I love being challenged on it, because defining our words is really important. And when I have done this many of the surveys, I found that people objected to number one, and at a surprising rate. That was really alarming to me. Though they could be right, maybe it means something else. So I asked them why and just try to get to the root of it. So I have been occasionally just negating the word external if I'm reading it out loud. Depends on who I'm talking to. Only because, yeah, I feel like sometimes
Nathan,
I'm thinking
want
like,
to briefly
go ahead.
interrupt you. As I'm trying to imagine this in my head, I'm very familiar with the survey, but as I'm listening with the voice of somebody who isn't, I think I'm a little lost. We're talking about question number one, and I think we've read it once and talked about it 10 times. Could you introduce us to more about the survey? Yeah, and maybe some overview about the survey so people really get what it means.
Sure. You want me to take this one, Ben, or did you want to? Because you made it.
Both of you. I'd both of you weigh in on it.
I'll give a quick background. So in street epistemology, what you'll find frequently is there's kind of these, I wouldn't call it formulas, but templates that people give. A common one is like the thought experiments that people have, like the Ferrari thought experiment and the tic-tac thought experiment. And what's cool about them is they make it easy for people to learn the technique. It's, if a common problem you might run into is somebody who hasn't really thought about proportioning their confidence in a claim to the evidence that they might have to it or available for it. So then you can go to the Ferrari experiment, where you kind of start with a very mundane claim like, I own a bike. and you ask the person to say, okay, how confident are they that you own a bike? And then you can build it up all the way to something like, I've got a rocket ship. And the idea there is that for most people, they'll quickly say that for a mundane claim like a bike, they'll believe you 100%, almost just with your say so as the evidence for it. But as soon as you start making your claim more and more out of the ordinary, they'll reduce their confidence accordingly. And that kind of becomes something that you can then use as a baseline for the conversation that you have. So
And that's
what I
number 16, right? There it
might
is.
be. So the idea behind the survey was, in street epistemology, there's markers that you'll find, things that people say, ideas that people have that are really interesting to explore with them from an epistemology perspective. So what I did initially when I created this is I sat down and tried to think about all of these things that I've seen in the videos I've watched and in the conversations that I've had that I think are useful for somebody having a conversation that can be a topic almost all on its own. So initially I just wrote all of these down and I came up with a list of something like 40 statements. So the structure that we've got now, splitting it up into these 4 sections, that was just more to make it less intimidating. Rather than having this wall of questions in front of you, there were these 4 main questions with the 6 sub-questions that just break it down. And what you'll also find in I studied some psychological methods that they use when they create surveys like this. So the agree to disagree spectrum from having it non-binary, that's something that I found that they use in psychology. And obviously to make it, or to try and control for bias, I try to phrase the statements in different perspectives, or at least perspectives I agreed with and perspectives I don't agree with, so that there isn't a pattern that somebody can say, okay, this is what this guy is expecting of me, so I'm just going to agree with all 6 of these because that's what it seems he wants from me.
Yeah,
And
and
I think,
speaking with the psychology aspect of things, usually if I go through the survey with somebody and challenge them on a particular belief, I'll usually start with the section on when we should change our minds before I go back through to what is truth, as a way of illustrating why we would care about what's true. Because we tend to have lots of reasons for why we would want to change our minds, and a lot of history with other people who don't. So if we start there, it can remind us as to why we value the truth in the first place before we go in to assess the truth of the claim. So I found that to be useful.
that's very clever. Have you had ideas for questions that you would like to add?
You know, the thought had crossed my mind a couple of times on creating a whole new survey on what evidence is, though it'd probably be a lot harder to make. I just feel like there's sometimes a disagreement about what qualifies for evidence as a major impasse in disputes of belief. And so the thought has crossed my mind a couple times on just like creating a couple of similar statements, basically a similar outline. I don't even know if it can be done. It's just me thinking out loud, but maybe taking, what you have these 4 sections in the survey. It's what is truth? How does belief work? When should we believe? Which is usually the hardest for a lot of people, or there's a lot of differences there. And then when we should change our minds. And we could do maybe a similar one with evidence. I don't know. I don't think you can widely apply evidence to everything in an abstract sense in the same way that you do with this epistemology survey, but like maybe a section on what is evidence? How does evidence work? When should we consider evidence? When should we discard evidence? Like those could be sections maybe to create something like that. Though it's just my imagination running wild with me. In terms of like questions about the survey, I just like to throw out that one that I get questioned on a lot is number 6, which is strong belief, even without action, can change external reality. And I talked about that one with Anthony a bit, and I think like the spirit of that question is, does prayer work? Does law of attraction work? Can I think something really hard and change the external world? And a lot of people interpret it instead to be, if I think something, does that have consequence?
Yeah.
I think that's a different way of interpreting it. Now, I used to resist that when people interpreted it that way, because it does say explicitly right there, even without action, right? So if we're not acting on it, is it changing the external world? And if we are strict about it, you and I would almost certainly disagree, right?
Yeah.
Though right. Though I found it useful if someone interprets it to mean my beliefs are consequential, meaning it matters what I believe. Strong belief, even if you don't act on it, changes the world. I just run with that. Sure.
Yeah.
Like if somebody thinks their beliefs are important, I mean, why else would I be asking them why they believe it if I didn't think what they believed mattered either? So I found that to be too useful to go with my interlocutor's interpretation of it from time to time. What are your thoughts on that? I don't know.
That makes absolute sense to me. I think if you meet somebody who is an idealist, who really does think that what they believe can influence reality in this kind of tangible way without actually taking any action, they'll know exactly what that question means, and you would then be able to talk to them about that. But if the question is ambiguous in the sense that if somebody doesn't hold that position, they're going to interpret it in a different position, in a different way. I mean, just having somebody say they don't agree with that, okay, it doesn't give you anything interesting to talk about. But if then saying that strong convictions and how important that is to them, that absolutely makes sense to me, that you can then use that as a better topic for your discussion. One thing that I've kind of been thinking about recently is adding another section to the survey, to the 4 main questions that we have. And it would be one that kind of focuses on tribalism. I think there's a couple of questions in there that almost kind of already allude to it. Like, do you look for opinions that differ from your own? But to me, looking at, especially now the way things are going with the pandemic, that seems to me to be one of the biggest issues we're facing in terms of epistemology, where people are really basing their beliefs on whatever their tribe is supporting. And to me, it seems as if we can have a discussion about that, work it into the survey, and at least have some markers when you're speaking to someone to see whether that influences their way of thinking, that'll be very valuable.
Could you, wow, that's always been one of the hardest things to break through. I mean, have you read How to Have Impossible Conversations by Peter Boghossian yet? Yeah. There's a section there about role casting. And whenever I hear somebody say, because I want it to be honest, I want to stick to only honest role casting. If I hear somebody say, I care more about whether or not this is true than what the crowd thinks. Then I reinforce that behavior by role casting them in it and saying, yeah, you prefer to care more about the justifications for your idea rather than identifying with the idea. And that's what I've been going with so far, which I think is important. What kind of, because these are all statements, they're not questions, right? So they're statements. What is like an example of one statement we could add to the survey that would deal with tribalism?
So one,
because I kind of see that already with one of these. I think it's number 10. If all members of a society share a belief, they are justified to hold that belief.
yeah.
And that's generally number 10. There it is.
So one, I think the one I'm not sure which number it is, but there is a statement about I look or I speak to people who don't agree with me when I try to evaluate a claim. I seem to remember there was something like that. But if it isn't on there, then that's one of the things that we can add, for example. Or when I value the opinion of people who don't agree with me, something like that.
Nice. I'm just reading the screen text here.
Oh,
Altercasting.
This is from Reed. He mentions that the actual term in the book is altercasting that you called role casting, and he thinks role casting is a fine term.
Perfect.
Altercasting sounds very weird. It sounds
he
like
even says it's possibly more clear. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like something you could have in a Catholic mass or something.
Yeah. So long as we're being honest, I think that I think if I have any one major criticism of the book, it would have been like the whole story about I changed this person's opinion about their favorite sport. Like
Yeah.
I like to keep it really strictly honest, and the minute we hear somebody say something that's really what I want to hear, that that helps us connect because we share the same value, I want to really add a megaphone to that and put a magnifying glass on exactly how we're similar and the kind of behavior we would want from each other out of the conversation. Juggling lessons. Do you have any more questions about the survey?
Yes,
I have
I
at least one
do.
question, but I'll save
not
it
about
for
the
later.
survey. I put all of my survey questions on your plate, knowing that that's what you wanted to focus on, and I focused on the other stuff. So I have lots of other questions, and I bet so does our audience. So if you're done with the survey, I'll throw my video up. If you have some more, finish them up.
I've got probably two more.
Oh yeah,
let me see here. So, well, a couple. So in the third section, when we should believe, there's so many different ways you can take the conversation. If somebody is marking on an opposing agree or disagree on these, I think number 13 is pretty self-explanatory for us that do this all the time. But let's see here, number 14. Number 14, it is important to know where we came from and what happens after death. So I've just been kind of going wherever the wind takes me on that one because it's about important and what we think about how important it is. How do you generally handle if somebody says yes or no? What's your go-to? Like, how do you generally question somebody if they say either yes or no on that one?
That's one.
What are you looking for, I guess?
So some of these questions I don't even know if I should say this, but I almost view it as a way of diagnosing someone, of understanding where they're coming from. And this is a question that I found quite controversial when I added it to the survey, but I left it in because it's kind of a if somebody answers yes to this question, it typically means that they've got a high need for what do you call it, for closure. They're not somebody who's comfortable with uncertainty. And typically those are that's a major reason why some people have God beliefs. So for me, it's always interesting to dig into why this is, how somebody would be affected if they became convinced that maybe there isn't an answer, maybe that answer will never be accessible to us, and to see if they would push back when you talk about it in that sense.
Yeah, when I generally do my interviews, I just ask briefly why. So the fact that you call it like a diagnostic test, almost like kind of like feeling a pulse for their attitudes behind their belief systems, and I generally just get their back and forth on it. But one thing that's been really helpful is it says it is important to know where we came from, which we could talk about evolution, things like that, and what happens after death. And that's usually like hell and heaven and things like that, or spirit worlds or something like that. Though I found it really interesting to ask people if they care about the world after they're dead, as a way of seeing if there's if they have, basically it's a weird way of testing their existential thoughts on if there isn't an afterlife, what would be the motivating things to think about the world, and why would we care about the world that continues on? And that's just something that comes up, and it usually just invokes a really interesting discussion about existentialism, which is a little different than epistemology, but still, nonetheless, I find it to be a great point to excite a conversation. And it's also just a good way to see whether or not somebody would want to believe in something about an afterlife simply because it makes them comfortable, or because, you know, sometimes people say if there's no way to know it, then it isn't important to know. And so that's a good way to assess how they feel about how important things are to know if you have access to information or not. Cool. Just a couple more questions on the survey here. This one was really tough for me to question until I got better at it. But what's your go-to for number 15 here? Believing something that is false is okay if it gives you comfort.
So
So if somebody says yeah, because this is really common in my area anyway, my location, people say sure, yeah, no problem at all. Why? What if it brings me comfort? You know, it's okay, right?
my go-to on that,
What's your go-to on that?
to ask them, are there any circumstances where you would say it isn't okay to believe something only because it gives you comfort? So there you can start testing out, okay, but let's say it almost puts you in a third person perspective, where they need to think about somebody else who's saying, okay, I'm believing this and you don't like this, but it really it comforts me, so why don't you just leave me alone? So you can, if that person has something which they might be believing that's only giving them comfort, that already starts them thinking through that process to say, okay, but is this okay? Why am I saying this is okay? And when will it not be okay?
Yeah, I found that outsider tests on this one has been the most effective in in reaching people. Outsider tests is definitely useful for this one. Okay, so here's the tough one, the tough question I have for you, Ben.
Okay, I'm ready.
So number 17 on the list can be really intense for a lot of my interlocutors, and it's someone is justified in their beliefs until they are proven wrong. And I find this to be kind of like the faith question, but in a different format, maybe. And I usually use an illustration about mermaids. So, like, if somebody's believing in mermaids, but the reason they think that there are mermaids is that you can't show them that there aren't any mermaids out there, right? So they're justified in their beliefs until you show them that there are no mermaids. So if somebody's at an 80 on their scale, but they don't know how to move down from that, um, because they feel justified since no one's shown them there aren't any there, then they might be stuck forever believing that there are mermaids. And so that's something that I ask people about that scenario. However, I was challenged once with this, and I want to know what your thoughts are on it. Let's see, I wrote this down. Bearing in mind number 17, someone is justified in their beliefs until they are proven wrong. Where are you on the scale of confidence that there's life on other planets?
Is that what somebody asked you, or?
Well, that's sort of, yeah. Somebody kind of just like said it, not quite so directly. So I'm putting that together, like their claim about life on other planets, and see. So, and this is the conundrum that I'm in, is like, I do feel that it's probably wiser to say someone's not justified in their beliefs until they're proven wrong, and yet I do personally feel somewhat justified, and I'm not really sure what to think. There could be no life out there at all. I mean, I have no idea. I don't know what your opinions are on it. Though if there's billions and billions and billions of, et cetera, planets and all that, is that a justification for thinking that there might be? Even though we have no, until we're proven wrong? This may be a bad question. I'm just kind of
I
throwing
like
this
it.
out there.
It's something which I kind of encounter a lot, not just with this question. Somebody will think of an example and then use that to say why they think something is reasonable. I've got a friend who I'm kind of doing this long-term discussion with, who's a Christian, and one day I just sent him a picture of my YouTube feed, and it's just full. It's schizophrenic. It's freaking apologetics videos and atheism videos and Pine Creek and everything mixed in. And I asked him, if my YouTube feed only had atheist videos, what would the effect of that be? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? And he said, okay, now you'll think about this and he'll speak to me. And he came back and said, well, what if my feed was just, if the subject was mathematics, and in math you've got a bunch of videos about math, and now you need to go and study why math is wrong. Why would that be a good thing? So to me it's not really like it's a false dichotomy. It's the two claims there: God exists or Christianity is true, and mathematics works for what it says it works for, on two different categories. So there, I tend to go and say, okay, but do you think that's a fair comparison? What makes the two different? When we look at people who believe in math and people who believe in God, are they the same type of people? Do they use the same methods to arrive at those conclusions? And that usually clarifies things to a point where it's not okay, but we've got this one analogy and we need to strictly work according to it. Because I don't like just saying, oh no, that's a terrible example. I don't think that's a fair analogy. That just seems like you're kind of evading it. But you can use that as a way to actually dig deeper into whatever the claim is that somebody kind of wants to protect. Because it seems to me if you do take that approach where you say, but okay, but this is something like math, or you kind of divert the conversation away from what you believe. It's a mechanism that we use when we're trying to guard our belief from going underneath the microscope.
Groovy. I dig it. Well, I'm a big fan of the survey, and yeah, I think that about covers like
Okay.
kind of the nitty gritty of the difficult parts for me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ask you a question
Go ahead.
about this.
Please.
Number 13 is one of those that when I put it on, I really thought this is a pointless question to have. The question is, believing something without evidence is admirable. Because I couldn't imagine somebody saying that they strongly agree with that statement. And my friend who also likes giving out the survey came back to me and said that almost half of the people he speaks to either agree or strongly agree with that statement. And I was blown away. I thought it's probably going to be less than 10% of people who see it that way. What is your experience been?
It depends on where I am. I most of the time I do my workshop at festivals because festivals are a place where, or at least the festivals that I go to, are usually a place where people are willing to try new things. They're willing to be challenged, and they're looking to have fun. And it's different than being on a campus or a street corner. I actually haven't done the whole get out there with a booth thing yet, except for at festivals, only at festivals, and only recently have I gone out and done the Anthony thing and just walked up with a camera on my neck. Number 13, believing something without evidence is admirable. There are, in my experience, in Portland anyway, and the festivals that I go to, people say no, they disagree by and large. Though I have met people that say the word admirable is misleading here. Evidence isn't the only thing, and that it's weird that it's worded as admirable. I would admire it, but they'll argue with the phraseology of the statement, and they'll say, in my experience, probably like, I don't know, 20% of the time, it's okay to believe in things without any evidence at all, and they'll find some example as to why they think that. So yeah, that's my general experience. Yeah, and it's hard to question that one.
Yeah,
was
that
that?
one, Faith in Humanity Restored. I was worried that that really is like a majority view. Yeah, that one. I think I've phrased it as it's a virtue to believe something without evidence. But to me, that was kind of becomes too philosophical. So I thought admirable might be a better phrase, but
I agree that it is, yeah. I think it's fine the way that it is, just to be clear. Because you are asking if it's admirable is like, would we want to look up to a belief supported without any evidence at all if somebody else did it about something else? That's usually it's usually my go-to, the good old outsider test. So that's usually my way of questioning that one. But in my experience, yeah, most people disagree. And then if I have a claim on the table and a claim is being supported on the basis that it's okay to believe in things without evidence, then I refer to the number 13 again and say, we just checked that. disagree, are we doing it here with this one? With this current belief? That is, if somebody wants a deep dive,
Hmm.
But
That's
any
actually
other
that
questions for me on this, sir? Oh yeah, go ahead.
just makes me think about how good that a pre-discussion about evidence would be, because I think many people have a misconception around what evidence means. They think when you say a word like evidence, it's something that's undisputable or something that you can do in a lab, something like that. And I think most of us, when we talk about evidence, we're just talking about something which actually supports one position above another one. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you can touch or feel. It can be arguments, anything like that can actually function as evidence. But it becomes very meta discussion.
Well, I'd love to get into a subreddit or like a Reddit chat or some sort of like Google Doc and hammer out what kind of survey could be made on something about evidence. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah.
So I have one question now and a big one later, and probably a bunch from the crowd if you're into doing that. Nathan, please drop your video. I'm going to bring mine back up. Let's see.
Sure.
Ben, what is your confidence that your practice of SE is good for society? This is a 3-part question. I'm going to ask 3 confidences.
Okay.
Is SE good for society? What is your confidence?
SE good for society. I'll put that at 70%.
Okay, thank you for that.
The reason
So,
there
like I
being
said here-
that
there we go. Go ahead.
it's based on my experiences of how it affects people. What I found is you can't really see SE as a fix-all tool. Sometimes you need to have there's a time and place for debate, and for some people, SE might actually alienate them, as weird as that sounds, because especially when you do it in like a text setting, people find you can often think that you're insincere, that this is just not how somebody usually talks to me on Facebook. So this guy is just
Right.
faking being nice to kind of get me to do something.
Yeah, I hear that. I try to, well, okay, I have the benefit where when most of the SE that I end up doing is in public environments on Discord, where I've actually give a few minutes of description about SE first. So I'm describing. I'm going to try to be as neutral as I can. I'm only going to hold things. And so a lot of that distrust is diffused because I'm telling them exactly what my intention is in fine detail. So I have that's an advantage for me. Also, of course, on the show, I do get some time with rapport ahead of time. I don't show as much of the rapport on the show as is how much you should have. A lot of it happens in pre-show and as I'm setting things up, and I can't really force it into the show.
Yeah.
So what's your confidence that it's good for your interlocutors?
That's tough. How do you factor that? I think if you control for situations where you end conversations when you see clear indicators that it's not going to have a good outcome, my confidence is pretty high that it's good for my interlocutors. So I would put that at 85%.
$85. Yes, thank you. And then the last, is it good for you? Is it good for Ben Diesel?
Vin Diesel, it literally changed my life. Just the approach. Before I started AC, I've always been somebody who's enjoyed a debate, who thought it's when you've got beliefs and you meet people who have different beliefs, but those beliefs are harmful, at least according to what you believe. You've kind of got a duty to speak your mind and try to convince them and explain to them this is where I think you're going wrong. And obviously, I mean, we've all been there. It doesn't just turn out as
my angry atheist face. Oh my God. was embarrassing.
Yeah, I know. Like the South African political situation is pretty much been the way that the American situation has been for the last 5 years, for as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Oh, wow.
challenging. So for
Challenging.
me,
Okay.
discovering street epistemology really just improved the way that I communicate on every level, with everybody
Okay.
basically. Just the ideas. It taught me a lot of empathy, which has had a huge impact on my relationship. So for me, street epistemology being good for me, it's a almost 100%, but I'll give it a 95 for those occasions where you get into a conversation and you're like, why did I do this to myself?
Indeed. I'm gonna throw a curveball at my production people and ask. No, I'm not. No. Next question. And let me open it up to the crowd. I'm realizing timing. Let me open it up to. I've unmuted everybody. I hope you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask. If you'd like to voice your questions directly to Ben, and if you want to type them, I will be happy to voice them, and I will throw in with mine in between anybody else's. I have one. Oh, I see. Madly, several people are typing.
If anybody asks me if I
Oh
own a
yeah,
life,
actually, this is the question that I was going to ask, and I thought not to. They saw it ahead. Fantastic. Without pushing into anybody's privacy, can you tell me how your intimates see your hobby of SE?
so I came out to my parents. Actually, street
Came
epistemology
out
kind
as
of forced
atheist?
me come out to my parents as an atheist because
Okay, not
I
as an
shared
epistemologist.
no
Yeah,
as an atheist.
right.
I shared one of
Uh-huh.
my videos on Facebook. My sister saw it and she was very upset. She let my parents know, and so they drove down so we can have a conversation about it. And their response was actually surprisingly positive, very positive. Where
Hmm.
for my dad, even though this was an issue for him, his son doesn't believe the same thing he does. The idea
Okay.
that I'm going out
So your
speaking to
parents are
people.
theists, or they're still? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. They're
Yes.
still
Uh-huh.
theists.
Mm-hmm.
My dad has kind of gone through this in his old age phase of deciding to teach Sunday school and all of that. So they're kind of getting deeper
Mm-hmm.
into it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so for them, even given that that's something that they take very seriously at this point in their lives, the idea that I'm going out speaking to people who disagree with me and trying to understand their positions, they really respected that and saw that as
Mm.
kind of a search for truth. And
Mm-hmm.
for my dad, that was like, don't worry, this will get you back onto the right path again. Because
Oh,
you,
because he's just sure that the truth is there. So if you search for
yeah.
it, you're going to find his truth. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
What's your confidence that that's the case? No, you don't have to answer that.
on my wife has been very supportive, except when I use it on her. I think that's where when I speak to her and I was trying to do SE, she sees it as insincere. She would rather
Mm-hmm.
have me take my position and say why I disagree rather than asking her questions to probe into
Yeah.
hers. So it's it has changed quite a bit because my approach nowadays isn't just going purely trying to remain neutral. So I'll still
Mm.
state my position and then ask questions to gently challenge her position rather than saying, okay, but this is what you should think and this is why you should agree with me. But yeah, overall, she's
Interesting.
been very supportive.
I generally hold neutrality until after I've done my hypotheticals and given some feedback. And usually I've been able to say, so what's your position? I say, I will absolutely tell you on step 7 of my flow chart. And for now I want to remain as neutral as I can so I don't budge you. And people are generally okay with that. Although
Okay.
again, I might be in a slightly different my sample is probably different. Doing a lot of it online. Okay, I have a question. What advantage or disadvantage does Ben see to the survey as opposed to the SE templates? I think the SE templates would be things like my checklist of I'm going to ask for a claim, then confidence, and then reasons, and dig down and do some hypotheticals, and then some like that. Whereas Nathan's typically doing the survey in a different. What do you see as the advantage between those two approaches and disadvantage?
So I think one of the advantages of the survey is it's not what some people would see a leading conversation. It's not as one-sided as somebody might perceive Elenchus to be. It's you talk about the questions, and your conversation kind of naturally flows onto the topic, where the person would say, okay, well, what do you think about this? Or where they would make a statement and you could see, okay, they're really thinking about this, and you can then pursue that and drill deeper into it with them. Where on Elenchus, I think for many people, not necessarily your interlocutor, but people watching, it might seem as if you're following a script or following a recipe that's very one-sided. On this advantages of Elenchus, I don't think that the survey on its own is as effective for really drilling into somebody's epistemology. It's very broad and it's very high level, so it's doesn't have the same purpose as that Elenchus would have in actually drilling down into why somebody believes something and exactly what they believe.
Okay, I'm going to take just a moment to reset. And maybe that reset for me. Let's find out. No, not yet. I'm going to do.
Something that I've also found with the survey is there's actually a huge advantage. It works better the more people are involved in the conversation. Where in Elenchus, obviously, the more people you have, the more distracting it becomes. So you can literally put the survey down on a table, have a group of 5 friends, and start a discussion. Because it's not focused on a specific claim, because it's very general, people actually start challenging each other around those claims, and that becomes very, very interesting, because now you're not this outsider asking these personal probing questions. You're somebody bringing an interesting topic that they can discuss amongst themselves.
Okay. Does anybody from the room do you have any questions that you'd like to voice for yourself? Not yet. Or maybe people are having a hard time unmuting if they don't. Go ahead. Yeah, everybody's unmuted.
I did want to point out one thing though. If I have a lot of people at my table, if I'm tabling, I like to go with Reed's thought experiment. What's the rule? Where there's so like if I have like 8 people or 10 people surrounding my booth, then I think the survey is probably a bit much for that many people, at least a question. You could have them all fill it out and they can talk about it all day and let them go home with the survey and ask each other stuff about it. Though I like to play a game with Street Epistemology. What is the rule? Reed has a great video out there where he gives three digits, 3 numbers, and then asks people what's the rule, and they can guess what rule precedes the numbers. Maybe he can explain it better than me. But he basically is looking to see if people know what is causing these 3 numbers to be related in some way. And he can say yes or no to those to people's guesses. Is it multiples of 2? Is it multiples of 10? Is it what, and it's just any numbers in ascending order. So people can guess 3 numbers to see if it follows the rule. And he says this follows the rule or it doesn't follow the rule. I'm not explaining it very well, but that's what I might go to when there's lots of people around as a fun game with lots of people. Though the survey is great to just let people go home, take it home with them.
Yeah. Now that game is amazing. That's actually an awesome idea. I'm going to try that next time I'm in a group of people. Yeah, I think the idea there is to show the value of falsification, because if you try and guess a rule based on what you think the pattern is, and it fits, it doesn't, or what it does, it fails, you haven't kind of dismissed anything, especially if your pattern is kind of complex. So by actually giving examples that don't fit the pattern, you are eliminating potential elements that might be in that pattern. But it's really a counterintuitive way for us to think. I mean, it took the scientists, I don't know how many centuries to figure that one out.
I will, of course, put that link in the doobly-doo after the show. Okay, so last two questions, unless somebody else throws any in. Is there anything that you... Oh, Redding, would you like to... Do you have a question?
I do. It was
Yes, go for it.
It was something that you touched on about tribalism, and that you're looking to look into it. It's one of my, a pet interests of mine is human behavior and tribalism, and I find that the effects of tribalism usually aren't apparent to the people that are being affected by tribalism. So, wouldn't that be hard to kind of pin down if the like to form the questions to, so it's like, especially when you ask questions about the crowd, the in crowd and stuff like that, I find a lot of people will, although they may not be aware of it and they'll go along with the crowd, but when they become conscious of it, they almost go against it as a point of contention. Almost, they don't want to follow the crowd, even though they do follow the crowd.
Yeah, and I think it'll be something very difficult because you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, if you use the outsider test for faith and you're just saying, okay, but what about if we put it on this person and they just listen to their favorite news station and they refuse to listen to a news station they disagree with, the person might just go and say, okay, but that's because they're a filthy liberal, or that's because they're a stick in the mud conservative. So it might be very difficult inherently because of the outsider test for faith, or the outsider test being your only tool to really approach that, to do that. I think an example that you can try and use is where somebody had a conversation where they felt that tribalism was hindering actually them being heard. So I think a lot of us might have experienced that. I've experienced a couple of times now, and it's really a negative experience when you feel like somebody just isn't able to hear you because they see you as an outsider that's just coming to mess things up for them. So I think going to those common experiences might be a way of maybe reaching them. But yeah, it's a good point. I think it's a very, very difficult topic to approach.
A very fun one too, though. That's the problem.
Yeah.
When you're interviewing, do you find it difficult to stay neutral? And maybe under what conditions is neutrality the hardest for you?
I don't find it difficult to stay neutral. I've had a couple of claims that have been morally repugnant to me. One example would be a guy I spoke to believed that women shouldn't be able to accuse men of rape because they were created for man's pleasure. So, and this was very, very early in my street epistemology career that I had this discussion. So, and I was able to remain neutral, drive down to the core belief and actually continue the conversation. So, when I do struggle to be neutral is when it's somebody who's very close to me, even somebody like a colleague, and they've got beliefs which I find to be morally reprehensible. I tend to then have an emotional reaction which can easily derail conversations, and it's the closer someone is to me, the harder it becomes. So it's part of why I appreciate what Nathan's doing so much. what I'm doing or what I do in my videos is kind of taking the easy way out. I'm always talking to a stranger, so there's no emotional connection. It's really not such a big deal. But what most people would like, or what I think the value that somebody would typically get out of street epistemology is when they actually speak to the people closest to them. Because not only is that a position where you know somebody and you know what they believe and you're in a better position to talk about it, but you're also in a position where you've got a higher likelihood of having that person hear you and having some kind of influence on them. And what Nathan's doing, speaking like the video he has with Abram, which is one of my favorite videos on street epistemology, talking to a friend and showing that how you can have this conversation in a totally non-confrontational way, it's just amazing. And I would like to have like a family challenge where street epistemologists just go out and talk to their families and post those videos, because I think it might be a completely different experience to their normal conversations.
Well, I would not actually ask any of my fellow practitioners to even attempt that. I just think that the downside is, ooh, that's a steep downside if it's bad. That's a lot of personal cost. So, ooh, ick. I'm pressing the wrong button. Have you damaged any relationships coming out of SE?
I have with one of my colleagues, where it was a difficult situation where the belief she had, I felt, had really tangible negative effects on her life. So that kind of motivated me to push much harder than I usually would, and it backfired. So yeah, it's just one of those lessons that you learn where you need to know when you try and push harder, especially because you feel there's some kind of pressure to do that. It really is counterproductive. The whole idea of street epistemology is to be non-confrontational, to respect boundaries, to listen and not just go and deliver whatever message you want to deliver. So it's just one of those things that I had to learn the hard way, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, last two questions, unless something comes up. Oh,
I have a question, if I may.
FK has a question. Throw it up there, please. Let's voice it.
What is the main difference, if you have noticed any, between SE practiced with the people in the US and you doing SE in South Africa?
It's a very good question. South Africans, I think we don't have that kind of happy-go-lucky attitude that people seem to have in the US. This might be completely my prejudice that I'm showing here, but I think in the US, it's not so weird to start a conversation with a stranger in the street. And to me, I thought it's going to be something very difficult, especially considering that the only places that I had available to me was like a university and a park. South Africans, especially when it's their leisure time, they don't like being interrupted. They really appreciate their privacy. And what I've found is, on the initial approach, it usually is people are very hesitant or very suspicious of what it is that you're trying to sell. But I've been pleasantly surprised by how many people, as soon as you explain what you're doing, and what I try and do is really to give the person an out, because I know if you walk up to somebody and you say to them, can I ask you something, it's almost already a foot in the door type of situation where they feel there's an obligation there. So I try to almost warn people, to tell them this is what I'm going to do. So if this doesn't sound like something you want to do, get out now. But yeah, to me, it's been surprising how many people are up for it and how many people enjoy it. I think I've had over 100 conversations, and I can only think of 2 or 3 that I would say had a negative outcome, that somebody didn't enjoy the conversation afterwards.
Wow, that's an excellent score. My penultimate question is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like my audience to know about?
So I had an interesting experience on the Street Epistemology Facebook page where I can't even remember what the subject was, but there was a discussion around something that was contentious. And then I made a claim, and somebody responded with, but this piece of evidence that I gave, I can't remember what the exact piece of evidence was, but does it always mean that if you have this piece of evidence that your claim is true, whatever that statement would be? It's a kind of a boilerplate street epistemology question, does it always mean that this thing is true? And it annoyed the hell out of me. I think it's because I'm somebody who knows how evidence works, and obviously I'm not putting a statement out there to be this is the absolute truth, and I would be willing to reduce my confidence. So I think street epistemology, you really need to have a very good feel for it to decide when to apply it, and unless the person you're talking to and understands what they're getting into. Because I've also found that on like skeptic groups, where you've got people who are a bit more philosophically minded, it does seem to antagonize people, and just because it kind of comes across as insincere or as if you're just saying something to score points. So maybe just a warning to say to people that when you do SE, I know it's difficult. We all have to learn, and it's something that you need to practice to get used to it. But just be aware of that. Don't see it as a way to, throw in a question and score some points. That's, to me, is really against what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so avoid those things that have negative rapport value. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, my last question, and I might be lying because people are typing, is so it is my desire to practice and teach SE. What advice do you have to a teacher of SE in going forward? What do I need to focus on especially?
I think the best thing to focus on to get people on board are the practical advantages. So if the sooner you can get somebody to just start having these types of conversations and see the benefits that they get out of it, the better. SE to me really represents a mindset rather than a skill of tools. Also, obviously the tools are there, and we're trying to build them and flesh them out, and they actually make it easier for people to jump in. But I find that the core values that you should have as a street epistemologist, being an example of what you would expect your interlocutor, the behavior that you'd expect from them, being patient, having empathy. Those are the things that are on less tangible. You can't see them in Anthony's videos. You think Anthony's just a nice guy, but those are really, really key to being good at having these types of conversations. So, yeah, rather than just trying to teach somebody, give them a script and send them out, I think we should be focusing on teaching the mindsets that actually will help somebody naturally flow into that type of behavior.
Thank you. And I did get an additional question from the crowd. What is your favorite color?
I don't have a favorite color.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know, is a perfectly good answer. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everybody else in the room and everybody else viewing. I couldn't do this without you. I wouldn't do this without you. I really appreciate your participation.
Thanks, Dolly. I had a blast.
Thank you. Here are 5 of my favorite SE channels that I want to recommend. I actually recommend quite a few more, but there's room on the screen issues. And so if you go to the promoted channels on the YouTube, you'll see a bigger list. If you are really interested in this method of street epistemology, my favorite set of resources are gathered on streetepistemology.com, provided by Street Epistemology International. The resources there are gathered by the street epistemology community and nicely collated and wikied and edited all together, and so on. Thank you all for joining me in this discussion about SE. If you would like to be a guest on my show on any topic relating to SE, I have 8 different categories. We can shove you in there somewhere. And I would look forward to hearing from you. My link for the calendar is in the doobly-doo. Yes, and there will be a link to the survey PDF, plus another 1 or 2 of the videos that were discussed that will add to the doobly-doo. Thank you.